Are we ready? Are we going? I got no red light. That's a good sign. Got the thing off the cover. That's a good sign. So, all right. We're ready. Welcome, everybody. My name's Larry Williams, and I'm the director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Wayne State University. It is January 25th, 2013, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to another version of Meet the Methodologist. And this is an extra special version of Meet the Methodologist because we're going to have the chance to chat with two gentlemen who have been contributing to CARMA, each of them for nearly 15 years. And for that and many other reasons, they happen to also be two of my best friends in the profession. So it's a real pleasure to be here chatting with Jose Cortina from George Mason University and Bob Vandenberg from the University of Georgia. And as you should know, they're here on campus today because they will be delivering two lectures, the first one beginning at noon, that Jose will do on moderation and mediation, and one at 1:30 that Bob is going to do about urban myths and legends as relates to statistics and methods. And it's even extra special to have him here today because you may have noticed elsewhere or gotten some of our communication that this week we were very excited to announce the CARMA Global Community. And our CARMA Global Community will be the mechanism as a professional association that we are developing, that faculty and students throughout the world will be able to have individual access to CARMA and the various materials that we have. And thanks to the cooperative efforts of Sage Publications, the Global Community will be a sponsor, a co-sponsor of the journal Organizational Research Methods, along with its main sponsor, the Research Methods Division of the Academy of Management. And it's especially exciting given that because Jose is the current editor of Organizational Research Methods and Bob is the past editor of Organizational Research Methods. Fellas, always a pleasure to be hanging with you.
Pleasure to see you.
So, Jose, you ended up getting your undergraduate degree at Tulane. Bob, you at the University of Georgia, and I'm wondering if you would just share a little bit about the forces that led you to those two fine institutions and how you arrived at psychology as a career choice, or management and OB as a career choice. And we'll kind of take turns as to who goes first. If you start us off.
Sure. I grew up in Baton Rouge, and unfortunately the reason that I went to Tulane was to be near my high school girlfriend, and we broke up about 2 months into my freshman year. So that was more or less the entire basis for my choice of undergraduate institution. Isn't that heartwarming?
And as trying to cope with the devastation of that led you to psychology.
That's exactly right. That sums it up beautifully.
Okay. Bob, how about you?
I had a similar, very mature reason for ending up at the University of Georgia. I had gotten stationed in the service in Georgia and learned that the Georgia winters, I can ride my motorcycle year-round. And so when I was discharged, why go out of state when I could ride my motorcycle every month at the University of Georgia? So that's why I chose the University of Georgia.
Is that inspirational or what?
It's just a lesson about how crazy the forces can be that lead us down our paths sometimes. So, but you did end up, both of you, selecting graduate school as a career path. And do you remember what it was like making that decision, and what were the things that led you to do that rather than anything else that you might have done at the time?
Yeah, this one's a bit more mature reason. So here I was we were in the quarter system at the time, so I was near the next to last quarter of graduating. Had no idea what I was going to do, and I was doing this honors thesis with a clinical psychology professor, and his name's David, and I forgot what his last name is at this point. This is 40 years ago. He goes, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I got this job offer from a marketing firm." And he goes, "That would be such a waste of your talent and things like that. Have you ever thought about being a professor?" And I said, "No, what's that?" And he said, And he explained the whole thing to me, and I said,
He,
wow.
he clarified for you that
Yeah.
that was the name of the people that had been standing up in front of you talking for all this time?
Yes. Well, I never thought about it as a career, though. I just thought, So Dave actually talked me into going on to graduate school, and I'm glad I did. It was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was it.
How about you?
I did know I wanted to go into psychology from, I think, early high school on, but like most high school students, psychology was just clinical. I didn't know there was anything else. And at Tulane, there was an IO program. There isn't anymore, but there used to be one. And when I took intro my freshman year, the professor brought in one of the graduate students to do an IO lecture. And I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. This is psychology, but not with crazy people. And from that point on, the only decision was, do I want to go applied or academic? And I went back and forth on that one, as my students will be surprised to learn. The person that actually convinced me to go academic was my college golf coach, who said something to the effect of, you ought to go academic because there's more latitude for strange behavior.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was right about that.
Yeah. Right in advising you of that, or right that that
On all
was true
counts.
of
On
the
all
system?
counts, yeah.
No strange behavior.
Yeah.
All right, so you end up in graduate school then, and I know it's been a few years back, but I'm wondering if you have any particular salient memories of specific things that happened during your graduate training that had an impact on you.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest impact by far was working with Neil Schmidt. And his classes, for those of you who know Neil, he's a very soft-spoken guy, but his classes were just phenomenal because he's so knowledgeable, and he's so organized, and all the materials are so organized. You just couldn't help but feel this is the best classroom learning experience I've ever had. And then as an advisor, it could be frustrating because if you gave him something to get feedback on, he would drop what he was doing and read it. If he was in town, you were going to get it back in 24 hours. And if he was out of town, the moment he got back, you would have it within 24 hours of that. So you sort of get something done, you finally get it off of your desk, and it's back on your desk the next morning. But it did mean that things moved along quickly. And everybody that worked with Neil, I think, feels exactly the same way about just what an inspirational figure he is.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, it was actually the summer before I started graduate school, so I was just waiting for the fall to happen. And there's a woman, she's deceased at this point. Her name's Katherine Rosen. She had an NIH grant to look at the efficacy of senior resource centers in the community and stuff. And they hired me on this grant, and she said, what do you know about statistics? And I said, nothing. And she threw, the SPSS manuals were about that thick in those days, and she threw it at me and said, well, you're my research methods and stats person on this grant. And so in one summer, I taught myself stats, but the thing was phenomenal to me, I found something I loved, was the statistics and the research methods and how it could be used to answer questions and stuff like that. And she's the one that turned the switch on that I haven't turned off 30-something years later. With respect to that, had a huge impact on me.
Mm-hmm. Jose, how about you? What did you go to school in your doctoral program with existing interest in stat and methods? Or, I mean, I think it's important to note for those who may not be aware that it's typically the case that leading methodologists like Jose and Bob also have strong substantive interest. And but there's something along the way that catches the spark in stat and method. So how did that work with you?
Well, it started in undergrad, actually. At Tulane, the stats guy in the psych department was a guy named Bill Dunlap, who was a very well-known statistician in psychology, very prolific. And I was fortunate to be able to take 2 of his graduate stats courses when I was an undergraduate, and learned a ton. But that really started the interest. I mean, I had the same sort of reaction that Bob did. I really like this stuff, and I think there was also something, I got a charge out of the fact that everybody else was scared of it, and I enjoyed it. Then when I got to Michigan State, Neil was always a methods person as well, and he's the person with whom I worked primarily. So, you know, same sort of thing. It's always been my first love professionally.
Yeah. So you, in case you don't know, both Bob and Jose have done, as one of their main areas of methodological research, structural equation modeling. And I'm always interested in the recollections that people have and how they get connected with a particular technique that for which the passion evolves. What do you remember about your first exposure to SEM?
It was I think it was a JPSP piece that was written by David Kinney, and it was like 1982. Forgive me if the date's all wrong here, but it was one of the very first publications that used SEM to test hypotheses, and it just intrigued me. This whole thing about models, getting beyond regression, you know, taking into account measurement error and things like that. And, but there wasn't any SEM courses in those days. But that one article is the thing that really got me thinking about this and what can I do to learn about it and stuff. And fortunately, I had Larry James right down the street from me at Georgia Tech, and he became a tremendous resource at that point. Helping me grasp things and stuff. So
yeah. How about with you?
It was Neil's psychometrics class, my second year of graduate school. That was when I was first exposed to it. And in those days, there was really only Lizroll, and it was, as you remember, much, much harder to use. And if you've used Lizroll, you know that that's saying something. But in those days, to actually do structural equations modeling, you really had to understand what you were doing. You had to understand how it worked. That's not true anymore, and there are, you know, positives and negatives there. But it was through Neil's psychometrics class that I started getting interested in SEM.
Yeah. One more question, if I may, fellows, about graduate student days. So now you've been out of school for a while and you have a lot of experience training and mentoring doctoral students, and I'm wondering, you know, whether you have any key bits of advice that you can offer to doctoral students that will help them during their time as a doctoral student.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying this because I'm here. Do research on research methods for at least two reasons. One is it tends to be cited more heavily because, you know, if you do research in a given substantive area, the people in that particular area will be interested in what you're doing, but nobody else necessarily will. Everybody needs research methods. If you do a paper on structural equations modeling, then it's not just the people who do selection research that are interested, it's the people who do research in every other substantive area as well. They're all going to cite that paper. Even people outside of your discipline are going to cite that paper. You know, we were talking about Bob's measurement invariance paper. If you look at the citations of that paper, I mean, I haven't counted exactly, but a considerable percentage of them are from outside our field altogether. That's not going to happen with the substantive stuff. The other reason is you're not at the mercy of the data. If you do empirical research and the data just don't work out, then too bad. You know, that's a whole lot of time that ends up getting you really nothing at all. With method stuff, it's just if you find a problem and you can figure out what the solution is, that's a publication right there.
How about you, Ben?
Yeah, and I agree with Jose, but I think Jose's answer would be coming from teaching graduate students in psychology, and so I'm going to put mine a bit different in terms of teaching graduate students in college's business. And to be quite frank with you, if you do just pure research methods research as a college business professor, you're probably not going to get promotion and tenure at where you are, and you do need to become an expert in some sort of substantive area first. But I would say on top of that, though, is also if research methods and statistics is your love, make that a very, very strong underlying theme to most of the research you're doing, so that when you do get promotion and tenure, you can drop the substantive stuff and move in the direction that you really love, okay, at that point. And that would be my advice coming from that perspective. So, which is, I think, what you and I had to do, basically, because we both came through college as a business,
Yeah.
and had to establish substantive research programs first, and then let our methods side come out of the closet. So,
Although in those days there was no ORM, and more schools of business are considering it an A journal.
yeah. Yeah.
All right, so, well, since you mentioned ORM, I'd like to switch gears a little bit, because now going from graduate school and the time since graduate school, you've been involved in the publication scholarship process from several different perspectives, as an author, as reviewers, as editors. And so I've got a couple questions that I'd like to use to kind of stimulate some discussion on that. So first of all, would you just comment from the perspective as a reviewer and an editor on what some of the most typical shortcomings are of the papers that you see, whether they be methodological or substantive? And
It's Bob's turn.
Bob's turn.
I'll do one shortcoming and turn it over to you, because we'll probably over.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So, to me, the number one shortcoming is not answering the so what question, regardless of whether that's substantive or methodological. There has to be a compelling reason. There has to be a marketing ploy behind why you're writing what it is you're writing, and so. Saying, well, this has never been done before is not a compelling reason. There may be a reason why it's never been done before. It's because it's low-hanging fruit and it's just not worth doing in the journal space and stuff. So that, to me, is the biggest shortcoming I see, even to this day, in manuscripts. So.
Yeah, I would say that for method stuff particularly, that's the one that this doesn't pass the so what test. And when I became editor of ORM, I dropped the editorial board of Psych Methods, for example, and that was okay with me because I kept writing the same reviewer letter for everything. This is really competently done. No one's ever going to read this paper because it's just too narrow. I remember one paper that I think was published in Psych Methods on an improved estimator of the standard error of the difference between dependent coefficient alphas. Not even the first person to figure out the estimator. This is a better estimator. I don't know why we need a better one, because I don't know who's going to estimate that in the first place. But I had this boilerplate so what paragraph that I put in there, like I always did, and it didn't seem to resonate with the people making the decisions. At ORM, that paper it probably wouldn't even get sent out for review because it doesn't pass the so what test.
The other shortcoming I see, probably second on the list, is not having the data or operationalizations of the constructs to be able to test whatever it is you test. You have a very strong theory. I mean, the hypotheses are well postulated and stuff, but then going and collecting the data is just, you just don't see a match between the measures and what the constructs were produced in the introduction and things like that. And so, they got strong theory, but weak methods and weak data coming out, and they just can't possibly test the stuff that they were proposed. So that would be number 2 on my list.
Right. You got a number 2?
I think it would actually be the arguments are weak. I mean, for me, what I was always writing about in letters for JAP was you haven't really justified these hypotheses. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, but especially as our models get more and more complex, I don't necessarily see that people understand even something as simple as how do you justify a moderator hypothesis. X affects Y and M affects Y so X and M interact doesn't make any sense, but I would see that sort of thing all the time. That's just one example. I think as our models get more complex, we need to get a whole lot more sophisticated about how we think about relationships among variables, and I'm not sure that always happens.
You got a third? Third and final?
Well, third and final, and that would be, sometimes people have really good theory and really good data, but the statistics are just off. You know, they're not using the right statistic to answer the question. And I just want to say, that's usually not a rejection. That's usually, because statistics can be fixed. If you do revise and resubmit, and highly encourage them, that would be, I would just tell people as advice, though, is if you don't have statistics as your forte, please go out and find somebody that has, so that when you submit that manuscript, it's as strong as it can be from front to back. So,
We're going to come back to that,
Okay.
that issue. One more for you?
Number 3 would be Bob's number 2. The methods just, they cannot possibly do what it is that you want them to do, whether it's single source data or maybe more specific to that, wanting to make cross-level inferences but not really having the data to do that. I would like to see our field pay more attention to the sophistication of the actual procedures and measures, and if anything, I'd like to see less of an emphasis on what is entirely new here and more of an emphasis on let's find better ways to test these things.
I'd like to transition, staying within the publication area, but move on to a topic that we were talking about last night.
I'm going to change tapes.
Okay? Just bear with us. We're still going live, right?
Yeah, it's wrong, so.
Yeah. Good? All right. So in some of the comments that you were just making, the issue of proper use in statistics and research methods was raised. And whether it's through the growth of the research methods division or the availability of ORM or any of several other forces, I think,
CARMA.
or CARMA, it can't be denied that the past 30 years or so, roughly speaking, if you think about 1980 as being the kind of the birth of SEM, and that's just one technique, but just a lot of change in the development of new methods, new statistics, new software packages, and it creates a challenge for authors to stay on top of those new methods. And in part as a result of that, it's not uncommon when you get a group of methodologists together and more quantitatively oriented people, one of the topics that naturally comes up concerns the state of affairs in the quality of the methods and analysis of articles that are published even on our top journals. So I just wondered, you know, what thoughts you might have on what can be done. Everybody that's playing the game has the objective of generating knowledge that represents the optimal combination of statistics and methods and theory. What can we do to improve the situation?
Well,
Or if you want to define the problem a little bit differently first, or elaborate on the problem, that's fine as well.
on the stats end, what we were talking about last night in particular was we see so many papers that are published in our top journals where the statistics are clearly wrong. And somebody who knows that procedure could look at that paper and know that they're wrong. The specific example that we were talking, well, one of the examples was, if you read a paper that has SEM, you can count up what the degrees of freedom ought to be, and it is very often the case that those are not the degrees of freedom that they're reporting, which means that you don't actually know what model they tested. When they give you those fit statistics, you have no idea whether those are the fit statistics associated with the model that they hypothesized or something else. All you know is it's not this one. And if you know SEM, then you can do that pretty easily. But again, this is published, which means that nobody caught this. And I think the only solution is to make sure that somebody in the gatekeeping process has expertise in that particular approach to statistics and can catch that stuff. Right now, that's not happening, and I understand there are lots of practical reasons for that. There's huge pressure on the pool of reviewers for every journal. But I don't know what else the solution really could be, because we're never going to be able to train everybody to be an expert in every approach to statistics. So it has to be the case that the review process catches that stuff before it goes into print.
Yeah, I'm going to spin it my response a little bit differently, because I see part of your question is also continuing education, and I think it's our responsibility as individuals, as scientists, or practitioner scientists, that we keep ourselves up to date in terms of the latest methodologies, latest statistical procedures, and things. And I think that for some reason, you know, when I graduated 31 years ago, my cohort group, that was kind of the sense of responsibility we had. For some reason, I don't see that in some of the mid-career faculty anymore. They kind of blow off trying to learn new things, and I think that's a very irresponsible thing on their part. So I think that there needs to be more done in terms of people going out and educating themselves in terms of the new methods and new procedures and stuff. Going to the CARMA workshops or Hubana workshops or whoever's stuff. So.
Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about your webcams. So I'm interested in, yours is going to be moderation mediation, yours urban legends. Where did the interest in these particular presentations come from, or the topics?
Let me go. Let's say circa 1998. Okay. I continue to be bothered by getting these reviews back and editorial decisions back, even on revise and resubmits, where it was obvious the person just didn't know what they were talking about in terms of some sort of statistical process or methodological process and things and stuff. And so this began to bother me, what's going on here and stuff. And what really bothered me was when I saw it repeatedly. It wasn't just an isolated case, but I kept seeing this come up over and over and over again. So I kept bringing this up at conferences, with hanging out with you guys and other people and stuff like that. And the others began to point these things out too. There's kind of these repetitive things going on in the review process, and so about 2000, Chuck Lance, a very good friend of mine and colleague at University of Georgia, said, "Bob, you need to start documenting some of this stuff." And so I did, and one day he and I were just talking around, and I said, "You know, I think I'm going to call these statistical and methodological urban legends, myths and urban legends, SMOLs," and so it was basically on his encouragement and things that that I began to document, get other people to document it, and the snowball began to roll down the hill, so to speak, and got bigger and bigger, and now 10 years later. So that's what got my interest in all this. So.
All right, how about you, dude?
For moderated mediation, I think it started with, we had a brown bag presenter at George Mason about 3 years ago, talking about a moderated mediation model that she was testing, and so she talked about the mediation part, and then there was this moderator that she thought was operating somewhere in there. and didn't know where. And that seems to be, as I thought about it, I thought, you know, I've seen this sort of thing before, and that's kind of a strange phenomenon. You know enough about what's going on here to know that X causes M, which causes Y, and you think that this other variable is a moderator, but you don't know which linkage it's acting on. Why would that be? I mean, why would we let that go? And as I read more published papers that used moderated mediation, I saw that sort of thing coming up, and it really shouldn't come up. X affects M, affects Y. If there's a moderator, you know enough about these variables to figure out where that is, where it's happening. Is it X to M? Is it M to Y? Is it direct effect? Is it more than one of those? The other thing was a Jeff Edwards talk at George Mason. It was a year or two ago, I don't know. But he wasn't talking specifically about moderated mediation, but just the idea that people often cite papers as the basis for their research, but don't actually test the stuff that was in that paper. And as I thought about it, I felt like I was seeing that same sort of thing with the moderated mediation stuff. They said they were going to be testing a certain sort of model, but that's not really the thing that they justified. And so two of my students and I started coding papers that used moderated mediation, just looking for the problems that seemed to be common.
So since you both are editors, I'd like to get your perspective on, you've got a particular vantage point on the field of organizational research methods, and I'm wondering if you could comment on particular topics or areas within that literature that you think we are doing a particularly good job of advancing knowledge of, or whether there's some things and some topics and some areas that we're not doing a particularly good job on. Can I start with you, my friend?
Yeah. I actually think we do a pretty good job of developing new methods and of providing the resources that people would need to acquire those skills. I don't know that those skills get acquired, going back to something Bob said. I'm not sure that they really do get acquired. You can't force people to learn this stuff. But for me, it does come back to the review process. Authors will do whatever the reviewers and editors tell them they have to do. But if the reviewers and editors don't tell them that they have to do stuff the right way, then they won't. They won't actually bother.
Okay. What about you?
What we're doing particularly well at right now, Mo Wang's stuff and some of his colleagues in terms of latent class analysis and bringing that into the organizational sciences. I think we're doing a really good job in bringing that technique in. Things I think that still need to be addressed. I think there's still an awful lot of misunderstanding out there about multi-level modeling and what is a multi-level construct and how to form them and aggregation procedures and other types of things. And I think it's because there's just so many camps in the multi-level area that I think someone needs to take the responsibility of bringing these camps together so that there's kind of a cohesive set of guidelines, rules, whatever, statistical procedures to follow in that. And also with model fit. I mean, it's something near and dear to your heart. I think we still don't know a whole lot about model fit in the long run. And what we have is inadequate in terms of saying, yes, this model is more appropriate than the other alternatives out there. This one's less appropriate, and just having the statistical procedures to justify that. So.
Okay. What books do you keep handy, whether it's in your role as a reviewer or editor or author or working with students?
Number one on my list is Boland's 1986 or 89?
89.
89 SEM book. It's always on my desk. It's dog-eared and yellowed notepad so much that you can't recognize it anymore from the edges and stuff. But I know what each dog ear means and where I have to go for an answer to a question and stuff. So that's number one on my list. So.
Yeah. How about you?
I think for me, it's less books, and I still refer to I still have on my shelf the packet of notes from Neil's psychometrics class, and everybody I knew who took that class is the same way, because I know there's stuff in there, and rather than fishing around for it, I'll just go to my old 20-year-old Psych 818 notes. RMNet is incredibly helpful. If you have a specific question, I don't really know how to do this, I don't know where to find this, somebody out there does know that, and you will find out through RMNet very quickly. Andrew Hayes' website is unbelievable if you're doing any sort of mediation stuff. Jeff Edwards' phone number is very, I found that enormously useful over the years.
Okay. All right, so the last question. So you've been in the profession, as you've admitted, for many years, and you have continued to play at the highest level, both of you. And I'm wondering, you know, that takes a particular combination of forces, and I'm wondering, you know, what it is you think that keeps you guys going, that is responsible for the drive, and things that you do when you need inspiration for your work.
It's graduate students. I think that's the beginning and the end of my answer, really, because I've always gotten a charge out of students learning things, but also getting research outcomes. I don't, you know, none of us really need publications anymore, but the students do, and that's really what keeps me thinking about what the next research project ought to be, because there's a student that would benefit from that experience.
I agree with Jose, and I would also say I just simply love what I'm doing. And so particularly doing research and research methods and statistics is just, I don't know, it turns me on. So, and you guys, hanging out with you guys whenever I can, that's an inspiration and motivation to me, because no matter how dumb my question is, you guys never really make me feel dumb too much. Okay.
We got to work on that.
Yeah. Or at least I blow it off. I don't know. So, but yeah, and after somebody asked me how long I've known you, and I said, well, I think it's 25 years now, and Jeff Edwards is probably the same thing, and Jose a little bit less than that, but it's hanging out with you guys and being able to bounce my questions off and saying, am I nuts? Am I missing something here?
Well, we, as I said at the beginning, you've been making contributions to CARMA for nearly 15 years, and we're delighted that you've come back to give your webcast lectures today. And even though I know you guys really, really well, I've enjoyed having this opportunity to chat with you, and appreciate you making the trip here to share. So, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.